Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Carmen McGrath, and I'm a research fellow in public involvement for the National Institute for Health and Care Research, Applied Research Collaboration West, so ARC West. Today, we have Sarah Biggs and Louise Ting, who are public contributors at ARC West, and they've been working in public involvement in research for 15 years between them. So Louise and Sarah have collaborated to develop a guidance document on how to work effectively with public contributors, which they'll be talking to you about today. We are also joined by two members from our Young People's Advisory Group, or YPAG. So it's Alex James and Ella Parry. And a special thank you to them as they've taken time out of college and university to be here today. So the YPAG are a group of young people aged 10 and upwards who provide input and support to researchers undertaking healthcare research on and about young people. So very shortly, I will be handing over to Sarah, but just to say, please do ask questions as we go through. And to do this, we've got a Q&A box, so please put your questions in that, and we will have slots dedicated just to answering questions as we go on through the webinar. We will also be adding useful links into the chat. And just to say, we will be uploading the recording of this webinar to the NHR ArcWest YouTube channel. And we're also going to share the slides via the ArcWest newsletter. So Lucy's going to pop a link in the chat to that. So without further ado, I'm now going to hand over to Sarah. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Carmel. I hope you can all hear me. So I'm going to talk briefly, and briefly is always a challenge for me, about why, who, how, and what you get involved with patient and public involvement in your research projects. And I'm going to talk about PPI, PPIE, but what that really means is patient contribution. So when people hear the word PPIE or PPI or any acronym, that's what it means. It means getting somebody involved in your research project who is a carer, who is a recipient of care, who is a member of the public and not a member of the research team in a research capacity. So the next slide, please. The most important reason that you are going to want to get public involvement in your research project is because when funders are looking at your application, they are really keen to see that you have got an involvement of diverse service users, carers, communities involved in your process. So this is a slide I've been kindly allowed to share from the National Institute of Health and Social Research. So it makes your applications for funding stronger. Next slide, please. So really, why should researchers use public contributors other than what I've just said? I think the most important is a perspective outside the research agenda. So we are not looking and thinking, this is great, this is going to be published. This is great, someone's going to get a PhD out of this. Those of us who are public contributors are trying to see through your research agenda how you are going to make life better for people at the sharp end, better for communities, individuals, patients, service users, carers. It's really important. We care about the value, the scope, the ethics. And I will just refer to one of the things that happened to me quite early on when I didn't have as much experience as a public contributor, which was sometimes I saw projects and I struggled to see the value of them. And what I mean by that is I struggled to see how they could be implemented. They looked good on paper, but I didn't know how they were going to make that difference. And that is really important for your public contributors. And that gives you a challenge. Other research projects I've been on, the public contributors have looked, one, for example, was on delayed discharge for frail elderly people in hospitals. And the public involvement team felt, well, actually, you need to include patients who lack capacity. And what that means is people who perhaps on a temporary because of infection or a permanent basis, they might have confusion or dementia. But that's a real life picture. That's what happens to people who are frail and elderly in hospital. They are confused. So we challenged the researchers to include patients who lacked capacity in their project. And they did do that. That made it more difficult for them, but it actually made the outcomes of that research much stronger. difficult to implement, but important, and it is actually going to be published in the BMJ, and it doesn't get much better than that. So what do the involved public get out of it? It is important to have a voice and to make a difference and to feel that you can. And we've gone a long way from the days of no decision about me without me, that we've moved on. But still, we need to have that voice that says, this is what matters to me. You may think this, but actually it's me, it's my mother, it's my person that I care for, or it's my community. This is what matters to us. You're going to hear from our fantastic other contributors this afternoon, and it is an opportunity to build confidence, and they will talk about that. They are going to get paid for their time, and that's really important too. Very few public contributors are doing it for the money, but if they aren't paid or their time isn't respected and valued, then they will feel slightly less valued, and it's important they feel that they have an equal place at the table. Next slide, please. So who are you going to ask when you're thinking, okay, I've got to do PPI. What does this look like? How am I going to do this? Patients, yes. Carers, communities. Louise, my friend and colleague, is going to speak a little bit later about some of those communities we need to reach out to. Those whose voices are not that often heard, because that is often very, very strong. It's very good for people who, feel comfortable talking publicly, but actually you often hear the most important little facts from people who perhaps don't get a chance to speak. And it is really important to reach out to those with disability, learning or language difficulties, because again, that enriches your research. It proves it's inclusive, it's important. And you need to find a platform that people feel that they can use to contribute. Not everyone has a smartphone, not everyone's comfortable with computers, all of that kind of thing. You need to find a way, and that strengthens your research. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the opportunities for the public involvement throughout the research cycle, and Louise is going to cover that and show you the excellent document that she's come up with. But there are many different ways and stages in your research that you can engage with public contributors. There's lots of support and guidance on the ARC website and the NIHR website for you to find that. Next slide, please. So if you're going to involve public contributors, they don't have to sit on your steering group membership team. And I would say, please don't invite them to come along to meetings where you haven't got a question to ask them or an involvement you're looking for. Don't have them sitting at the table if there isn't something they can contribute, because that doesn't feel good. Very often we're asked to give early reviews of proposed projects. That's a really good opportunity for you to explore. I'm thinking of doing this piece of research. What do you think? And we understand now, and I understand because I've been involved with this longer now, those things change. They have a new iteration as time goes on. That's fine. Gives you an opportunity to reflect and mirror the thoughts you have with your public contributors. You can have really good advice from your public contributors with something that's actually quite painful to come up with, your plain English summary. It's usually a very important factor in your research bid. And sometimes you get lost inside the document. Your public contributors can look at that and say, actually, I don't get what you're saying here. What about this? What about that? And throw in ideas that you perhaps hadn't considered. A good one is a group workshop. And I do want to talk a little bit about surveys as well in this. So if you're trying to reach out to people, group workshops are a good way to start. If you are wanting people to do a survey for you, lots of people think of questionnaires, surveys, send them out. Your group workshop will tell you whether that's a productive mechanism for getting the results you need, getting the answers you need. They will help you sense check your documents that you're sending out. And ultimately, and again, Louise will talk more about this, your public contributors can help with knowledge dissemination. So let's go on to the next slide, please. So what does good look like? I've worked with a lot of researchers over time, and I'm thinking of an exemplary one that I was involved with last year. So I was invited with another public contributor to look at a project in its early stages as it went on, and I had very clear objectives for what was asked of me. I was very clear what the researchers were endeavouring to do. I had clarity about progress, clarity about the next steps and timelines. I'll talk a little about timelines. In your body of people that might help you with research, that will include public contributors, researchers, medics, other people. If you don't keep everybody posted, there's a real chance that people can drop out of the link. They may move on to another job. All sorts of things can happen. So I would say, doesn't take a long time, and I appreciate this can be challenging, but keep in touch with the people involved, just with a note, just to say, we're nearly there with our application, or we didn't get our application, or I've got to change my documents, whatever. Keep people in the loop, because that will make it a lot easier and quicker for you as you move on. With public contributors and other members of your research team, you need to be open to suggestions and have honest discussions. That can be challenging for everybody. Please ensure that you give your contributors, particularly those who are less used to being in this kind of group with doctors and professors and clever academics, if they don't feel they've got a voice at the table, if they feel that their question or their suggestion might be seen as a stupid one, they're not going to feel comfortable telling you. So if that is not the forum for them to be able to say it, that isn't too much of a problem if you come back to them and say, you know, we had that meeting yesterday, you didn't say a lot, what were your thoughts? Give them a chance to feedback to you. Give them timely information, you feedback to them, and ask them for feedback to you. Next slide, please. So I'm handing over to Louise, who's come up with our fantastic diagram, and I'm delighted to say she's an excellent speaker. So I shall hand over now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, I'm Louise, and I'm going to start with quite a frank statement. I'm not the kind of public contributor you usually see. Why? Because I belong to a number of marginalised groups. People tell me I come across as confident and extroverted, but I actually have more than one anxiety disorder, and I've been in therapy for low self-esteem since my teens. I'm from an ethnic minority, and I'm also queer, disabled, and autistic. All these things mean that I face barriers to contributing that others may not. And yet I actually have been able to engage with PPI activities for over a decade now. It's not by accident or mistake. It's taken time and investment from both sides. But I'm also lucky because those whom I worked with have had the skills and understanding to provide the supportive environment I need to build my confidence and reduce the challenges. Today, I want to share with you both a visual resource for patient and public involvement and also tips for how to make your work more inclusive. I'll start by telling you a bit more about my background. I have a long history of contributing to community and wellbeing services. I've volunteered for nonprofits, charities, and NHS organisations every year since my teens, and I'm also a patient and carer myself. This eventually led me to PPI, and I started off with helping commission the new mental health services in my area. In the decade since then, I've advised on PPI at regional, national, and international level. This has ranged from being a co-applicant on studies to training researchers to reviewing participant information materials to sitting on all sorts of groups such as trial steering committees and PPI strategy groups. I therefore draw from a number of perspectives: my charity work background, being a patient, being a carer, and also someone who's experienced multiple disadvantages in society, including racism and homelessness. Next slide, please. One of the most important things about working effectively with public contributors is getting their input right from the start, as well as throughout the research cycle. As Sarah mentioned, there are many ways you can involve people. By involving them at the earliest opportunity, they're much more likely to feel valued and to actually be able to influence the research. I still remember one time where researchers were struggling to recruit participants, and after I gave them an idea on how they could reach more people for their study, they said it was a really good suggestion, but they couldn't do it because it hadn't been written into their original application. You're going to avoid this kind of issue and disappointment if you collaborate with public contributors sooner rather than later. Here you can see a diagram that shows all the different types of involvement you can do in a way that maps directly onto the research cycle. It was created by me, then further developed alongside other public contributors and the PPI staff at Art West. It went viral on Twitter after being posted by both me and the Art West account, with hundreds of likes and reposts. It's clear, concise, and accessible. You can use it as a tool for planning your PPI when putting together a funding application. And it highlights some of the benefits that involvement will bring to your research. It's downloadable from my Twitter account, Flickr, and also the Art West website. Next slide, please. Good PPI is underpinned by good communication and reciprocal relationships. Whilst all the things on this slide are important for working with public contributors in general, I'd argue that they're particularly relevant in relation to underserved communities. These groups may have a history of feeling used or excluded, so building trust and being transparent are key. For example, if you can't take forward a suggestion, that's fine, as long as you're open and honest about it. Explain why so that people understand rather than are left feeling ignored. Be responsive, friendly, and positive in your interactions. Take the time to develop relationships and make it a safe space where everyone can contribute. Next slide, please. We know that research isn't inclusive enough at the moment. By not involving enough different people, a lot of research may not be representative of the population, so it'll be less applicable, relevant, and effective. This worsens health inequalities. However, there are things you can do to change that. Different communities have different needs and experiences. They have different cultural histories, social structures, and values, and they're diverse themselves. Have you thought about how you can work with these groups? This might require working in new creative ways and bringing people together through non-traditional means like music, food, and art. You should also consider who might be marginalised or most vulnerable and try to address hidden barriers to their participation. Where might the challenges be, and how can you overcome these? Next slide, please. I'm now going to share some practical tips for working with underserved communities. Firstly, consider your use of language. Are you using plain English? It's a language that you're using respect for and in terms that the community can identify with. For example, many autistic people prefer identity first language rather than person first language. However, when possible, ask people how they like to identify rather than assuming. There's also the question of people for whom English is not their native language. Are you able to translate materials for them as well? Secondly, allow multiple ways for people to contribute. For instance, some may prefer to provide feedback via email, whilst others might be more comfortable discussing things in a meeting. If it's going to be a face-to-face meeting, make sure you're there to let people in, greet them, and provide clear directions to the location. That may sound really obvious, but I speak from the experience of those things not having been available to me in the past. Thirdly, specify upfront, such as in emails, that you're happy to support people if they have any additional needs in order to be able to contribute effectively. This signals to people that you're approachable and takes the onus of them having to ask first. Fourthly, be creative and flexible in your approach. For example, if you're meeting them in person, it can help a lot to find a neutral setting, like a community venue or cafe, rather than your usual office. One of the best meetings I've ever had was in a neighbourhood cafe because it was informal, chosen by me, so suited my accessibility needs, held over a casual lunch, and with researchers who I got to know as people as well. Accessibility comes in a lot of forms, such as physical and sensory needs, communication styles, convenient times and locations, understanding more hidden disabilities, and working around individual circumstances. Neurodivergent people often struggle with paperwork, and refugees or homeless people may not have bank accounts. So are there other ways you can reimburse them for their involvement, such as with vouchers? You should also cover travel or carer costs and consider printing hard copies for people who find that more accessible. On the note of accessibility, always ask people what their preferred method of communication is and give reasonable deadlines for pieces of work. This allows people more equal opportunity so that circumstances such as health issues or being a carer don't disadvantage them. Above all, maintain a two-way channel of communication so that you can regularly reflect on if things are working. Checking in with people to ask how they found something or if they have understood what was brought up in a meeting can help people feel at ease and build trust. Finally, say thank you. Again, it's a simple thing, but it doesn't always happen. And people have expressed that this puts them off taking part in PPI or future research studies. Hopefully, all of this gives you plenty of things to consider for greater inclusivity. And Sarah and I are open to any questions you may have now as well.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Sarah and Louise, for your presentation. So we're just going to go to the chat, the question chat, and just to say, please do pop your questions in the Q&A box. You can find that just at the bottom of your screen. So we've got one question here, Sarah, that I'll just read out. So it says, what does PPI involvement with knowledge dissemination look like?
Okay, so if you're talking, I'll just tell you some of the examples of things that I have done from doing local television to try and talk about the delayed discharge project. Actually, we'd come up with a little video, and it was about getting collateral information about these patients so we could understand more about their lives at home. So I was really happy to go on television and talk about that. Sometimes there may be other ways of doing this by going out to perhaps to a workshop and talking live to people. Sometimes it's a matter of just helping with a document that's going to be actually published in the press nationally or locally. So it's an opportunity to say, usually at the point where either you're trying to recruit people or you're trying to talk about the outcomes of your research. I hope that answers the question.
That's lovely. Thank you ever so much, Sarah.
Oh, can I just make one other point, which
Yeah.
I did want to make, which is when we're talking about reaching out to groups of people to be your contributors, the one group that is massively underrepresented is actually men. So if you can try extra hard to recruit a few more men into your public contributor team, that really would be great.
Oh, and something to add around knowledge and mobilization, just before I forget as well, is I think that one thing that's sometimes overlooked is actually sharing that knowledge throughout the research cycle with all the public contributors and the stakeholders. What I mean by that is sometimes as a public contributor, you may be only attending one particular meeting or looking at one particular document, but actually having an overview of the entire project and being updated. So, for example, I'm not part of a group that meets very regularly for one of the studies I'm on. We only meet every 6 months, but I get monthly updates. And I think that kind of knowledge is actually key to me being effective as a public contributor when we do meet or when I am actually reviewing materials and things, because I don't miss out on all that kind of knowledge that's, you know, floating around or shared between other team members because I'm not invited to a particular meeting because that's not my role. So I think it's really important as well to kind of share that knowledge throughout and to have channels of communication open whereby it's not just focused on one specific task. You're actually, I guess, talking about the project overall with everyone who has a stake in it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Louise and Sarah. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Alex and Ella's presentation. So I'll hand over to you, Alex. Thank you.
So we're going to talk about how to work effectively with young people, specifically in research. And first, we're going to tell you kind of a little bit about myself and Ella. Do we have slides? Perfect. So if we can go to the next slide. So I started YPAG in 2020, so it was a bit of a while ago now. And I think I've got quite a lot of benefits out from YPAG. So like I've gained a lot of confidence. Like I wouldn't have been able to do anything like this at the start when I first joined. And it also gave me a lot of kind of like quite relevant experience. So I'm currently doing a degree which is like psychology related. So like this is obviously quite relevant to kind of explore like how research is done and all that sort of stuff. So I've really got a lot out of it. Yeah, Ella?
So I started with YPAG about 18 months ago, and I got into it via a family friend, but I found it's been quite relevant to my life as well. As an autistic person, I was diagnosed quite late, and one of the reasons for that is because of the lack of research in the past done around women or non-male people with autism. And so being involved in YPAG has made me realize the importance of research and helped me as a young person understand research a little bit more. And this is especially important for me because I actually want to go into health research when I'm older, and I'm currently applying to multiple universities to do biomedical science. Alex?
So there's three kind of main ways that researchers have got in contact and like worked with us as a YPAG group. So a really common one is having meetings, whether it's kind of online or in person, which I think quite a lot of people find that useful because it's quite structured. So they're usually maybe like an hour-ish, and either after school time or in school holidays, just because we are obviously young people. Another one other than meetings is like reviewing documents or information sheets. So that's kind of more like in your own time and then you send it back over, which can also be easier for some people. And then another one is we've been involved in some longer projects, which obviously has a lot of different kind of inputs into it. But those ones I think people really enjoy. But Ella's going to talk a little bit more about them.
There's like obviously there's like lots of different roles at YPAG, but there's specific benefits and disadvantages to each role. And you have to be careful when you are thinking about how shall I approach these young people, and in what method shall I use. So meetings are often used to gain involvement because they allow us as young people to interact face to face with researchers. So that helps give us a feeling of being listened to and really involved. And being with other young people in the meeting as well, you can kind of bounce ideas off of each other, and that can develop our suggestions and then help develop our input into your research. Meetings are also really good for us as young people because they help prepare us for the future. They help prepare us for meetings that we could have in jobs in the future. I know I have lots of friends who work in jobs that they're probably not going to work in when they're older. And so being in YPAG and having meetings with researchers gives me transferable skills. I think probably the disadvantage of meetings is that they are less flexible. You have a scheduled time and date, and unfortunately, life can be quite hectic as a young person. So that leads me on to one of the advantages of reviewing documents for researchers, which is one of my favorite jobs actually. So it is really flexible. You can spend, as long as you spend the minimum time on it, you can spend as long as you want on it, and you can take breaks, you can do it at home or wherever you'd like, and you can really get stuck in and analyze an information sheet. So I often really enjoy getting a public involvement sheet through that explains how they're trying to get patients involved and what they're asking of them. And I really enjoy actually analyzing it and picking it apart and then giving that back to researchers as constructive criticism. And I always am quite lucky in that I feel that my views and my feedback are always appreciated, even if they can't be implemented. It's also helpful for me as an autistic person because although I might be quite confident in sharing my opinions, it kind of eases the social pressure a bit because being in a meeting with lots of people can be scary, especially for younger children as well. So that's a really good thing that you can do to help get us involved. And always, I'd say probably the best way of giving us information sheets is giving us the information sheets early on in the stage for research. And I think probably the best way to involve us overall will be in the longer research projects because they allow us to get really stuck in. So Alex and I are going to talk a little bit more about that now.
So the favourite kind of research thing that I have been involved in was the behaviour management strategies and their effects on young people's mental health and wellbeing study. So it's about kind of how behaviour management affects young people and kind of their mental health and wellbeing while they're in like schools and alternative learning provisions. So we used peer interviews, but it actually came from a YPAG meeting in the first place, suggested by YPAG members. And then it was brought forward by Arc West, who was like, yeah, that sounds like good job. Let's do that one. So then we had kind of a first impressions meeting of like initial feedback of like what ArcWest was kind of proposing. We then had 8 hours of online training, like over a few weeks for like the people who did want to kind of do the peer interviewers. So we had lots of training for it, which included like practicing with each other, so we kind of knew what the interview felt like. We also like reviewed the interview guide so that we kind of like, because we're young people, we know what's more accessible to young people, so we can say like that question will not make sense to someone in school, which like is harder to do if you're not currently in an education setting like that. So once it was kind of all done, we then also had some review sessions of the training, just because it was a longer gap than we thought it would be. So they kind of were really supportive of it and said like, we're just going to run over it so that you still know what you're doing, which I thought was really helpful. We then got to the actual interviewing. So we got to interview the young people, and we're now working on the creative outputs for like how we should share the findings to the people that we want to share them to. So this was my kind of favorite one because I feel like it gave me a head start in like uni, because my degree is psychology related and on my course we're doing like research and peer interviews. I feel like I've got like a head start, so I'm a lot more like confident and knowledgeable about it than I would have otherwise been. I also feel quite interested in this topic specifically because I did struggle quite a lot in school because of my anxiety, and like the behavior management strategies didn't work. And I know they didn't work for a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons. So I'm glad it's a thing that kind of people are like looking into. And because we were involved at like every stage that we could be, and we were given lots of updates, it didn't feel like we were just like a tick box of like, yeah, we spoke to young people. It just felt like they actually wanted to kind of get us really as a part of the project, which like you don't get quite a lot of the time. But that's my favorite one. Ella?
Yeah, so my favorite project is an ongoing one. So currently I am part of an oversight group for a PhD looking into underrepresentation in mental health research. And this has been a really good opportunity for me because right from the start, I've been involved. It started with me reviewing the information sheets for the involvement in the PhD, which I quite enjoyed. And it's allowed me to design the demographic questionnaires for the study. And most recently, I've actually had the opportunity to be involved in a thesis supervisor meeting, which was amazing for me because I actually got a glimpse into the world of academia and research, and it's kind of cemented my belief that I want to go into research. So I think that kind of really demonstrates that good research can not only improve the research that you're doing, but improve the research that future generations could do. And I've also gained a real understanding of what future projects could be like if I'm working in a job, and it gives me an idea of how payment kind of works a bit as well, because you're being paid for a project over a longer period of time. So I think when you're designing longer term participation with young people, there are certain things that you can do really, really well. So the PhD student who was getting us involved was really good in multiple ways. So after each meeting, we were given like clear summaries of what each meeting was and how it kind of fits into the wider plan of the PhD. So we felt really involved in it, and it was made clear how we were helping. Furthermore, they just created a really friendly atmosphere that felt like we could just contribute. And we've been given an involvement diary to fill out as well, which is really helpful because often if you're given projects and there's like massive gaps in time between when you're doing one piece of work and another piece of work, your mind can kind of get a bit confused between what you were doing then and what you're doing now, especially as a young person with so much stuff going on. So I think it's really important when you're doing the longer studies to make sure that we're involved and make sure that it's clear how and when we're getting involved, but also not talking down to us and letting us kind of take the reins a little bit in some aspects. Next slide, please.
So my kind of number one highest top tip is like keeping in contact with us. Like even if you're going through the kind of research stages where we can't be like a really big part of it, just like having a little update to say like, oh, we've done this thing and we're trying to wait for this thing to happen. It just kind of like, it keeps it in your head and it keeps you interested rather than just like not hearing anything for months and then going, oh, we have another thing for you to do. It makes you feel like you're a real like important part of the project. And also having a main point of contact of like one person, preferably like the same person throughout the project, but obviously that can change. But having one person who like you end up getting quite familiar with. And if you're more kind of like comfortable with that one person, like you're a lot more likely to ask questions and to give like more like realistic feedback and everything, and it just makes it a lot easier to like be reminded of like what's happening and like actually like feel really comfortable in the meetings when you are doing it and giving the kind of feedback that you really want to give, like when it feels like a really supportive space. So I think having one main person is really helpful and like keeping in contact throughout. Ella?
So my main top tip relates probably the most closely to when researchers give us as young people documents to review, specifically patient and public involvement sheets that have like the information about what the study is going to be about on. So there's a fine balance that you need to maintain when you're writing these information sheets, because you're giving them to us to review so that we can help make them better. But you can help save us time and you time by making sure that it's to the highest quality possible before you give it to us. So one of the main things is about language. So whilst you may have to have loads of scientific words in there, because it's a study, obviously you need them. If you do need them, try and give definitions or minimize the amount of scientific jargon, because for a lot of young people, we haven't had direct involvement in science, so we might not understand some of the terms. But at the same time, you also need to be aware of not sounding patronizing. So if you give us an information sheet and it's full of bright colors and boxes and little cute animations and drawings, it can sometimes seem like you're treating us like we're 6 years old. For a lot of us, we are, 16 plus years old and we've gone through GCSEs, we've worked hard. We want to feel like we are taken seriously. So making sure that you use language that doesn't come across as patronizing, but is also clear and concise is really important, because when we feel like we're being listened to and taken seriously, we're more likely to make better contributions. Next slide, please. So to summarize, we've got some top tips on this slide that you can just have a look at, and we'll make the slides available so you can see them. But to really summarize, the main big point about working with young people is about accessibility. Because of school and life, we aren't often actually free. It might seem that compared to adults, we've got a really lovely, easy, less pressured life, but unfortunately for a lot of us, we don't. So be really wary when you are getting us involved in research of making the most of our time and using the resources that you have and that we have to set up the best times for us to meet, giving us incentive. So if that's money, references, things like that, that just helps us a little bit more, and so we can really get involved properly then. So yeah, it's the little things that really matter as well. Even if it's being direct about what you want. There's no point in me getting involved in a study if I can't help. I would be of no use if you're specifically wanting to look at the experience of young people of an ethnic minority. But I might be of help if you're looking for the experiences of young people who have been in hospital. So be clear and concise about what you want and be careful, and everything should go absolutely fine. Next slide, please.
So thank you for listening, and we hope that this has been kind of helpful for you and that you do involve young people in your research, and we look forward to your questions.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Alex and Ella, for your fantastic presentation. We've got a couple of questions in the chat for you both. So I might point this in direction of you, Ella, first. You mentioned this in your top tips about payment for public contributors and YPAG members. So one person has asked, as young people, are you reimbursed for your contribution to projects?
Yeah, we are. So if we travel into town, for example, for a meeting, we are given payment for the travel, but we are pretty much always given some sort of voucher or money. There might be a couple of small studies where we aren't, but those really are the exceptions. And I think it is quite important and valuable for you to pay us because we are very busy, and even the smallest bit of money can make the difference.
Lovely. Thank you, Ella. And Alex, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I was just going to say, as well as like actual like being paid, like other things that you can offer, like if it's a longer project, being able to give advice of like how to describe the project if you want to put it in like a personal statement for uni, or if you want to like put it on a CV or something. Like we might not know how like the right way to word it is, but like you probably do as the researcher. So other stuff can also be like really helpful.
Lovely. Thank you, Alex, and that's really helpful. And we've got one more question for you both. So someone said, how can people join the groups, the Young People's Advisory Group? So we do have one in Bristol, but we do have quite a long waiting list to join that group. But we also have young people's groups across the UK. So look locally, and there may well be young persons groups. But the person who's asked this question has also said, how can we encourage more young people with a variety of conditions to get involved? So is there anything that you would say about that? Yep, go for it, Ella.
I'd say it's quite a nuanced topic. I was quite lucky in getting involved in YPAG in that my family had a friend who worked at Bristol University, and so I got in via that. But I would say that probably target places where you're certain to find young people. So it could be schools. Don't be afraid to get in contact with schools about research opportunities. I would have absolutely loved to have been involved earlier if I could have. And there might be lots of young people who think it's not cool to get involved in research, but there's also lots of young people who really do want to make a difference. And also utilize social media as well. Everybody's on social media nowadays, so don't be afraid to say research opportunity. I know that actually there's been a couple of people in my school who have gotten involved in a research project with a university about diet, and that was just happened through the sixth form getting this email from the university and putting it on Google Classrooms. So it's just kind of using everything you've got to try and make it as accessible as possible. And often people who are like marginalized often want to speak. So through those channels, hopefully lots of people will come up and speak. And, like I said before, don't be afraid to put down like the type of people you're looking for, because you want specific views. Don't be afraid to specify.
Brilliant. Really helpful answer there, Ella. Thank you ever so much. And Alex, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think like I don't know, I feel like young people do want to get involved in stuff. Like if you said that to a lot of the people that like when I like said it to other people, like, oh, this is what I'm doing tonight after school, everyone was like, that's so cool. I don't even know, like I would do that. Like a lot of people like would actually really enjoy to do it, but like either they don't know about it, so like put up posters in like youth groups and like email like young people mental health charities and stuff. Like that's where people will find out about it. And also like make it clear that you can make kind of accommodations for people. Like I was a young carer, so if I started it any earlier, that would have been like really impractical for me to do any like meetings. But if I knew I could like just like review documents when like I'm able to step away from the caring role and not be in school, like if I knew that I could just do it in my own time as well, and it's not all like in-person meetings for hours, then like I think making sure that like people know that there's options for like, accommodations, and it's not all just like really intense stuff.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Alex and Ella. Okay, so I'm now just going to ask a couple of questions to Sarah, Louise, and Alex and Ella. So any of you can answer this. One of the first questions we've got is, what should be discussed in the first public advisory group meeting at the very start of the project? So I don't mind who wants to go first. Sarah, you're unmuted. Do you want to go first?
Okay, so very often the first meeting is either because someone has got an idea of what they want their research to be, or they've gone a little bit further than that. They've started to prepare the documentation. So sometimes that first discussion might be, this is the topic, the area that we're looking at. Does this concern you? Because not every public contributor would have an awareness of whatever it is you're looking into. And that actually will become quite apparent, because if that's not going to help you, it will focus you to go and find the right people. So the first meeting really is, this is what we're trying to do. What do you think about that? What do you think the problems might be? And you'd be surprised how insightful people who have no knowledge of that condition might be, and how they might give you some different perspective. And then I think I've noticed in some of the questions, people sort of wanting to understand if it's going to be highly technical, data-driven stuff. Actually, that might appeal to some public contributors. Doesn't work for me because I'm lost with it. I want to just see the sharp end. So you really do need to focus on what you're hoping to achieve, and make sure that people understand that. And your next step might be a completely different direction as a result of that. So just an opportunity to, and it'll be good for you, because you'll be getting a reflection on what you're saying, and possibly some direction that you might not expect.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Sarah. Beautifully answered. Okay, so I've got a question for Louise. Someone has said they found your talk really compelling and informative, and with someone as who's got a decade of experience as a public contributor, do you have faith in research as a means of reducing inequalities? Do you feel that sharing your voice as a PPI contributor, that you've been able to contribute to creating real world change?
So first of all, I think I just want to say thank you, because I have been, and I still am, really nervous about speaking today, and yeah, it's just great to get positive feedback and some reassurance. More specifically around the question, I think that we've got a long way to go, but from having been involved for such a long time now, I do feel quite confident that we're moving in the right direction. For example, when I first started off, sorry, I'm still fighting off COVID, so yeah, my throat's a bit sore. But sorry, I was saying, when I first started off in public involvement, there was a lot more tokenism around. And I think there was a limited understanding of what it could actually be. So, for example, it was very static and very prescriptive, and the ways in which you could contribute were basically, going to a group or commenting a document, and it wasn't very dynamic, it wasn't very responsive, and it didn't really allow for you to have a voice outside of the concerns of the researchers. But actually, as time has gone on, I've seen that move towards having more inclusive involvement, which is partly why I spoke so passionately about it today, because it's something that is very, very hard to do for a lot of reasons. For example, there are a lot of systemic issues. There are the challenges that I mentioned already around the barriers for people such as myself, and also those not like me, you know, people who also come from other minority groups, to be able to engage. And then there's also things like funding and awareness and stigma. And so I think that all of that probably became more prominent during the pandemic because of all the health inequalities around people struggling with COVID, and people from minority groups being more likely to have serious consequences of COVID because they weren't being acknowledged. And I think that that really brought it to the forefront of people's awareness. And since then, there's a huge drive from the National Institute for Health and Care Research to actually focus on communities and to look at all these underserved groups. I still don't think, if I'm honest, it's being done as well as it could be, but that doesn't mean that work isn't happening. And actually, there are exciting studies coming out all the time, or case studies, examples of really good practice that are out there. I think I only joined Twitter a few months ago, and actually it's really good at the moment for me to learn about what other people are doing. And obviously there's workshops like today, so I think that I do make a difference, and I found that on a personal and kind of more micro level, I guess, in terms of the actual individual studies I've been involved in. But I can see it across the NIHR as a whole, amongst my colleagues, amongst other public contributors I work with, and the funding that's actually going into it.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Louise, for your response to that question. We've got a few minutes left, so I'm just going to ask one more question, and this can be just kind of one response, but it's about what are your views about use of patient information videos that rather than written leaflets? Have you been involved in the production of any videos? So does anyone have any thoughts on that at all? Yes, Ella.
I personally haven't been involved in any videos about patient involvement in trials and things like that. But I find, as an autistic person, I have little things that I like doing, and I like having a piece of paper that I can look at and take my time on, and it kind of simplifies things. Sometimes videos can be a little bit overwhelming if there's like too much sensory things going on, and being able to sit in my room and look at an information sheet about a study is quite useful. But I think you would probably have to use a combination of both to get probably the most effective solution.
Lovely, thank you, Ella. And Alex, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think I've been on kind of the other side of it, of being shown kind of videos versus documents. But I think it depends on the person, and if you can give them an option and you can say, look, we have it in a document or we have it in a video, you can choose. You can watch the video and say, no, I can't watch this, it's got an annoying voice, and then read the document. But like, people, it depends on the person, and people want options. And also, if you do it in a video and only a video, please write the subtitles and don't use like the automatic subtitles, because they don't work and like it really messes it up.
Lovely, thank you, Alex. That's really helpful. And just finally, because we're just coming to the end now, Louise, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks,
Okay.
Carmel. I would echo exactly what Ella and Alex say, because one thing that, if you're going to take anything away, I think, from what I've spoken about inclusivity, is it's not one size fits all. And I would always advocate for more options to share information. So, for example, I'm neurodivergent. I'm not only autistic, I also have ADHD, but I've also got loads of friends who are neurodivergent. And actually, we're really diverse in that, for example, I prefer written, but my autistic friends, my friends with ADHD, a lot of them actually prefer videos and podcasts. I struggle to focus, but they find that easier. So I think it's always about realizing that it's going to be different things for different people. And if you can open up those options, then you're going to reach more people with different needs.
Fantastic. Thank you, Louise. So just to say thank you everyone for coming today. We hope that you've enjoyed the session and have lots of food for thought to go away with. A special thanks to all of our amazing public contributors, so Louise, Sarah, Ella and Alex, for presenting today. I'd also like to say thank you to my colleagues behind the scenes, Lucy, Zoe and John, for doing a brilliant job of organising and running this. As I said at the start, we will be uploading the recording of this webinar to the NHR ArcWest YouTube channel, and we will share the slides via the ArcWest newsletter. We're also going to pop a link in the chat now to a feedback form, and we'd really appreciate it if you could complete this for us, as it's going to really help us to improve any future webinars we do. So that just leaves me to wrap things up and say thank you, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and thank you for joining. Thank you, everyone.